Such an antagonizer.
Welcome to another episode of the Dawn of Shades. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and tonight we have our usual announcements to make before we get started. Like always, for tonight's program, like all programs, I would love to have the audience input with questions and comments. So you can email them to me at giascott@exogenynetwork.com. You can also email me with questions from previous guests, and I will try to get those answered for you as well. Now, for all of you Facebookers out there, we do have a Facebook group specifically used for this radio program and providing everyone a very easy way to make comments or even ask questions about the program in general. I do not monitor that page very closely during the program, so it's not the best way to ask a question about the guest on tonight, and I would suggest using email for that. Once again, my email address is giascott@exogenynetwork.com. Now, I also have an author page on Facebook, and I'd venture that it's probably a safe bet that most of our guests also have one. Independent authors and artists depend on their fans for support, even if it's emotional support from a distance, as well as for buying their books, music, or art. So with that said, I could use a few fans, and you can also find me on Facebook. And believe me, after the week I've had, I could definitely use some support. This week's disasters have included everything from my computer crashing and me having failed to back up my work. So there's a year's worth of work locked into that hard drive that we don't know for sure we can recover, to the news that my daughter's kidneys are, as she put it, not doing so well, which is far more devastating than losing a year's worth of work. I can recreate most of those files. I cannot recreate my daughter's kidneys. So here's a reminder. Always back up your computer files, but most importantly, go find someone you love and hug them. Tell them how much you... Okay, well, there's a little blip there, but go find somebody that you love and hug them. Tell them how much you do love them, and when it's all said and done, people you love are far more important than anything else on earth, whether it's money, your job, your house, or any other tangible thing. Now, our guest tonight does not have a fan page on Facebook. I know because I looked for it. So, with a nudge to Mary Jo Moore to greet the thing, I would like to welcome her to the show. Mary Jo, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, thank you, thank you. I'm Mary Jo Moore. I'm Irish, Cherokee, and Dutch. I live in the mountains of western North Carolina, and I'm the author of around 20 books and about 4 different anthologies I've edited of Native writers. I'm a psychic, a medium, a workshop presenter. I do a lot of different things, and I really know of no better way to introduce myself than with a poem. So if you don't mind, I'd like to start out with a poem.
That'll work just fine.
Okay, great. This is called Everyone Needs Someone, and it's about my Cherokee granddaddy. My granddaddy was a full-blooded Cherokee Indian. Bloodied is what I said because that's what he always said. My granddaddy was a full-blooded Cherokee Indian with eyes and hair black as tar and shiny as a crow's back. My Irish grandmother said I looked like him. I hope so, because I liked him. I liked the way his voice sounded like soft running water over smooth pebbles whenever he would tell me to ignore the poor children living down the road whenever they would laugh, point at us, and demand talk some Mexican. Sometimes he would tell me, touching my crying eyes with a copper-colored hand, it's better not to claim you're Indian in these parts of Tennessee. Everyone needs someone to look down on, everyone. But my granddaddy died long before I learned the truth behind stockade forts made of greed, thousands of tears trailing in the snow, unwanted lands reserves, the ridiculous act of termination, and the never-ending stings of discrimination. Long before he finished telling me the stories of how our family had to hide out in the caves of western North Carolina, long before the Cherokee blood in my veins began to truly overflow the Irish. And when he died, his eyes no longer shone. His hair was dirty, matted, and the smooth stones in his voice were muddied gravel. My granddaddy died drunk and alone, speaking his language to the stars.
That's a sad poem in a way.
It is sad, but I think that's one of the things that's really kept me writing all these years and drives me to keep my own Cherokee heritage alive through my writings, is the fact of how he had to suffer. I grew up in a very, very small town in western Tennessee. There were very few Indians there, and they were, of course, I grew up in the 50s, and they were looked down on. I mean, stereotyping it was racism. It was just pure racism. And knowing how he had to suffer, like I said, I think is one of the things that keeps me going. And also, he was the town drunk. So there was a lot of things that the family, or that I had to overcome, being of mixed race and coming from a family of alcoholism. But in a sense, it's made me stronger, and it's given me a lot to write about. I have to admit that.
Yeah, that curse of alcoholism within the Native American population, it touched my own family as well. And I spent most of my life absolutely terrified I was going to turn into an alcoholic. And I guess I was in my late 40s when I realized I wasn't going to catch it. I either was or I wasn't.
Right. I did catch it, as you say. I've been sober. It'll be 27 years this August, and I'm very, very grateful for that. I really believe if I hadn't stopped drinking, I wouldn't be talking to you now. I really feel like something, I would have committed suicide or something would have happened physically. But I'm very grateful for the fact that I am sober now. And I do think it's in all races, but me being Cherokee, Irish, and Dutch is kind of like a triple whammy there. But,
yeah. In my case, it was the Cherokee, the Irish, and the German.
Okay, well, yeah, it was the same thing. And, I've done quite a bit of research and talked to a lot of elders about alcoholism in the American Indian race. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that there was no processed sugar in their diets for thousands of years. And I think that's why diabetes is such a bad disease in the Native communities as well as alcoholism. The body,
in the Native American, because I've often been told that if there's no historical use of alcohol or processed foods, etc., there was more likely to be an issue, and that was also the reason for the frequency of lactose intolerance, because milk wasn't something that was used beyond infancy in Native Americans as well. So, okay, fine. But I think what we're seeing is the effects may have been felt by the Native American community first, but we're starting to see it explode into the mainstream American community, because it's not just Native Americans with this explosion of obesity and diabetes anymore.
I agree. And, it's not something to be ashamed of. It's something to deal with,
Right, and be aware of.
Right.
Yeah, I can remember as a child, because we lived near my father's family, which was German. And, spending time with his mother and stuff. And if I ever brought up, because my mother was the one that was mixed race, brought up my mother's family or Indian heritage, I can distinctly remember my grandmother telling me, "Shh, don't tell anybody, you don't want them to know." And communicating this thing that I was supposed to be ashamed of it, which was really confusing to a young child. This is somebody I respect, and I'm supposed to respect, but they're sending a very confusing message here. It was very, very confusing. And then you see what's on television, and of course, most Native Americans, in terms of movies you would see on TV and whatnot in the 60s and 70s, were not particularly complimentary.
No,
or
not at all.
Based on truth, even.
Right. Well, we're still dealing with that today, and a lot of literature and a lot of movies as well. I remember a Mohawk friend of mine who was about my same age. He was about the same age. I'm telling me that. I don't know if you remember, but on Bonanza, every time an American Indian would come on, they'd have that horrible, ominous music. Like the Indians coming to scalp you or cut your throat or kill you or whatever. And it really it could cause some self-loathing. It really could. And I think a lot of that, thank goodness, is changing now. And I think maybe since the 70s, when a lot of American Indian authors started publishing books and people started really paying attention to truth, that's one thing that I've always wanted to do with I have my own little publishing company, and I have published other Native writers and just published a wonderful anthology I'll talk about in a little while of Native writers. But one thing that I've always encouraged them to do is write their stories and write the truth, because that's the only way that it's going to get out there, because everything has just been so whitewashed. Another thing now that, speaking of mixed bloods, and I have something else I want to share with you in just a second, but another thing that we mixed bloods have to deal with today, and I am not enrolled, I'm not tribally enrolled, I do not claim to be from any particular band. I do know who I am, and I do know I have Cherokee blood, and I also have some Choctaw and some Shawnee. But one thing that we do have to deal with, especially writers of mixed blood heritage who are not enrolled, is a lot, not all, but there are some enrolled Indians who are constantly belittling us, putting us down and saying we're not Indian because we're not enrolled. So that's a real thing, and I've encountered that too. I was often the wrong flavor of Indian, not Indian enough, et cetera, et cetera. I got ridiculed by some individuals, and then at the same time you're not white enough, so you're kind of sitting on a barbed wire fence always. It's not a real comfortable place. Yeah, and I've gotten to the point now where it really doesn't bother me so much anymore. I just consider the source. And most of those people are sitting on their butts doing nothing, and their claim to fame, is that they sit there and put down others who are trying to make changes. But honestly, when I first started writing back in 1994, 95, it really hurt. It really bothered me. But through the years, I've just learned to, like I said, consider the source and realize that these people have some emotional problems. And if it wasn't for the mixed blood, let me just read this. This is the introduction to my book of short stories called Red Woman with Backward Eyes. And as a matter of fact, I had a client of mine email me a couple of weeks ago and tell me that she read this introduction, and it really, really helped her. And this book was published, back in probably the early, maybe around 2001, 2002. But this pretty much sums up what it means to me to be a mixed blood. There is a type of loneliness that infects one's soul. a loneliness that tears a hole that can never be sewn back together. No matter what color the thread, no matter how sharp the needle, no matter how many attempts are made to weave the torn soul with another's, the tear remains. This is the loneliness I have felt most of my life. Being of mixed race is not easy. It never has been, and I suppose it never will. I am not dark enough for some and not light enough for others. Because I was not raised on a reservation, some say I don't belong to the Indian race. Because I have Indian blood, some say I don't belong to the Caucasian race. For years, I wrote other beside the box requiring race specification. Cherokees have intermingled their blood with non-Indians for centuries. When my great-great-maternal grandparents were married in 1824, a Cherokee Nation census listed 73 non-Indian women married to Cherokee men and 147 non-Indian men married to Cherokee women. A friend once remarked, if anyone tries to blot out the mixed bloods, John Ross and Sequoia would have to be blotted out as well as many others. For a while, I tried repairing the tear in my mixed-race soul with alcohol, relationships, and other diversions, but nothing worked, nothing. The tear was to become a creative outlet, the birthplace of my writings. Sharing these writings evinces my refusal to have any part of me ignored, canceled, or blotted out. Taking into consideration the modern, traditional, and ancestral stories my Cherokee granddaddy, Irish grandmothers, and Dutch Cherokee granddaddy and great-grandmother had told me, I began to accept their stories as medicine, sometimes strong in the healing, sometimes gentle. These stories became an integral part of my spiritual growth. By remembering them, I could accept my place as one who lives in two worlds. I could stop treating myself as a victim and accept my total self.
That's a very nice piece.
Thank you. That was the point I was making earlier, is that what I have learned to do, and I don't particularly like the word survivor. I like thriver. It sounds much more positive. But what I have learned to do is take a lot of the pain, the anguish, and the hurt and turn it into something good by writing about it, taking the power out of it by speaking about it, writing about it, and sharing it with others. And I really believe that's the point. That was the whole point of my becoming a writer. It's the only thing that makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. I don't know how not to write. I write.
Well, writing is sort of the modern translation of being the storyteller.
I agree.
It's very hard to reach a large audience verbally telling a story. I mean, tonight we are, but in general, no, we reach a relatively small audience with storytelling. But when you write it, it can reach so many more people, and it can you literally reach out from the grave even. Long after we're dead and gone, the things that we write will still exist.
That brings tears to my eyes, because I have a son, Lance, who is married to a wonderful girl, Katie, and they have 3 daughters, Michaela, Emma, and Brooklyn. And I think about that a lot, that long after I'm gone, that they'll still have the stories, of their Nana, as they call me, because they are written down and because they're on paper. Of course, we come from a long line of oral traditions. Every race, comes from oral storytelling. But in this modern age, especially with the internet, you have to write things down. And of course, there are things, sacred things, that should never be written down and should only be passed on orally. But so many important things, we have to write them. And people tell me, I want to be a writer. And I say, well, just write. Of course, I wanted to be on Oprah. I wanted to have a bestseller. I gave up all that about probably 10 years ago, and realized that my writings touch who they're supposed to touch. I can remember growing up in an alcoholic home. My stepdad, wanted nothing to do with me. He sure didn't like the fact that I had Indian blood. I remember hiding in a closet with a flashlight or maybe under a quilt at night and reading other people's books and poems, and those things literally helped me get through my life. And that was my prayer when I did start writing, was to allow for Creator, God, Jesus, doorknob, whoever you pray to, the universe to take my writings and let them touch others and help others. And I know sometimes it may upset them, but that's okay too, because at least there's an emotional reaction there.
Yeah, so many people go through life, never engage in life. It's like, they're on the ocean, but they stay on their surfboard. They never, ever even dawdle their fingers in the water. So they just kind of are propelled by whatever wind comes along.
I think that's based on fear. I think that's a lot of just taught behavior modification, fear. I learned a long time ago to just feel the fear and do it anyway. And if you are spirit driven, as I think probably all creative people are, you're going to be called to do things you really don't want to do, and you may even be called to create something you really don't want to create. But that turns out to be the most healing part of your journey, is to feel that fear and do it anyway. Or that's how I feel about it.
Well, I always I like to create, as you say, create things. I create imagery. I have my ladies of fate. Okay, they sit up in a jury box floating in the clouds someplace. But my fear is a little green guy, and he sits on my shoulder. And he whispers in my ear all the time.
That's great.
Okay, as long as he's whispering there, everything's pretty much hunky-dory. Occasionally he'll screech. That usually means jump quick, something's about to hit you. And I just kind of half pay him attention. Now, the day that he jumps off my shoulder, I probably should get really afraid. But as long as he's sitting there whispering in my ear, I know where he is and I know what he's doing. Mm-hmm. He's this little green monster, and he's as invisible to me as he is to everyone else, and that's quite okay. I think if he suddenly appeared in public, we might all be in trouble. Whether I'm the only one seeing him or if everybody else is also seeing him, we could be in trouble. But yeah, I do. I create these images, and it's sort of tongue-in-cheek, but the images, for me, take away the fear, the uncontrolled aspect, perhaps. Like my ladies of fate, they're the ones responsible for all those things that happen to us, not because we deserve them, but just because they happen to us. That's the ladies of fate up there in the jury box, and they're cackling away and grabbing lightning bolts out of a basket and throwing them down at me just to see what I'm going to do and how high I'll jump. It's not because I deserved it. It's just because that's the lightning bolt they grabbed. And the worse it is, the more outlandish they're dressed.
I agree. And that's part of balance. I mean, we have to have fear. That's the way the world is created. That's the way the universe works, is balance. You can't recognize one thing without its opposite. And I remember an elder, I used to sit in meetings with this wonderful elder, and he would say, people don't do things to me, they just do things, and I add the to me. So that, there's a lot of wisdom in that. It's perception. It's funny. All the things that you hear and you read will eventually come home to roost in your mind, where it starts to make sense. It's interesting, especially if you're an avid reader, or if you listen to a lot of music or look at art or whatever you do creatively, whether it's making baskets or pottery or whatever. Whatever you need, I think, shows up at the exact moment. It's all timing. It's absolutely timing.
Yeah. Yeah, I was always told, if you need a rock, it'll arrive, and they always have, one way or another. I've given away rocks too. I have no idea why I gave that person that particular rock other than something told me, give them this rock. Now I live in a place that has no natural rocks. Southern Mississippi has no rocks. Our rocks are imported.
I would send you a box of rocks. How's that? I would gladly send you a box of North Carolina rocks.
Yeah, there are no rocks. I mean, I spending most of my life in northern Arizona where almost everything was rock.
Oh, yeah.
To move, first it was to New Orleans, which has no rocks either. And then now I lived on the coast for a couple of years, and now we live a little over 100 miles inland. There's still no rocks. If you go a little bit further east, west, north, then you can find rocks again. But in this particular area, rocks are few and far between. At least we've got hills now. It's not totally flat. Yeah.
You got plenty of mud, though, don't you? Don't you have Mississippi mud down in there somewhere?
Well, we have mud. It usually rains a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have to laugh because I used to live in a place that got 3 to 6 inches of rain a year. Sometimes it came on the same day. Now I live in a place that gets, like 6 feet of rain a year. Sometimes you feel like it's all coming on the same day. Yeah, we live at the top of a hill, so we're kind of safe from the flooding now. That was part of our reason for moving inland is I could not cope anymore with flood zones and storm surge and being a desert rat. The whole hurricane thing wasn't working for me too well.
I can understand that. Well, you definitely, have found the balance of living. You've gone from one extreme to the other, so.
Yeah, I swore my entire life I would never live on the wrong side of the big river. So guess where I live?
Never say never.
Right.
Never say never.
Yeah, I think someone told me, oh, you're going to move to New Orleans. I said, when pigs fly. I can now tell you I've seen pigs fly. Yeah.
How long have you been in Mississippi?
What is it, 4 years now, I think? 3 years.
I remember traveling through Mississippi years and years ago. And the one thing I remember, I don't know if they still have them now, but they used to have these little signs on the side of the road that would say, stay awake. And then about, half a mile, be careful. And then another one says, stay awake. Just all these wonderful little road signs on the side of the road.
They don't have that anymore. Now the most frequent sign I see as I travel will be such and such primitive Baptist church. I actually had to ask someone, what? Because I'm envisioning this really rustic building. And I'm like, they can't have this many of these, like ancient Baptist churches. Really, they can't. Is this, what is this? So I asked someone, and they explained to me about the different flavors of Baptist churches. And I went, oh, okay. I really didn't know. For me, moving into the Bible Belt has been really an interesting thing. I actually, last year, I developed this deep and profound dislike of Mississippi, and I was sort of kicking myself for staying here. I didn't like it. I really did not like it. And this spring, running errands with my husband and whatnot, and getting out on some of the byways, as they say, and these little country roads and whatnot, I began to see Mississippi. And Mississippi itself is a gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous place. Sometimes the people may make you forget, but we always remember the bad much more easily than we remember the good or the neutral. So
I heard that. Strange how we do that.
Yes.
I heard this. I lived in Nashville for 7 years, and there was this wonderful, well-known musician. I won't mention him, but I heard him say one time that. Actually, I heard his wife say that he could go and he could perform to a sold-out crowd. And if one person was sitting up front and didn't clap, that bothered him all night long. Didn't matter if the others were standing up and screaming and yelling his name. If that one person up front didn't clap, it just haunted him. So I don't know. Maybe we're just taught to expect. expect the worst or something. I don't know. But I've never really understood that about her human nature. Why we're that? I'm the same way. I mean, I think we are. Yeah, I think we dwell on it, and that's.
And some people tend to remember the negative things much more deeply and profoundly than others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they seem to be affected by it much more deeply and profoundly. You know, I hope I have gotten a little bit better, because usually I'm kind of like a duck. The negative people that we encounter in our day-to-day life, I just sort of like shrug my shoulders, and it's forgotten 5 minutes from now. But this past, it was mostly through the fall and winter, it was like they were oil and they were soaking into my feathers, you know. And it was really, really hard. And I couldn't even get rid of that, the last batch of oil, and here came along somebody else dumping some more on me. And so by the time it was all said and done, as I put it, I had a hate on for the entire state. A hate on, yes. And the hate on thing began to sort of eat away at me, because, you know, every day when you get up, you think, oh, I hate living in Mississippi. And was it fair? No. Was it reasonable? No. It was based on probably a total of a dozen people, evenly spaced out, that really did said awful things. And is it fair to judge an entire state by those dozen people? Well, obviously not. Nobody said, you know, they can represent me. Nobody in their right mind would want them to represent me. You know, so there again, you know, I was letting, and there's the key, I was letting these negative people decide how I was going to feel. And, you know, it took getting out and watching the landscape come to life this spring, as the leaves began to emerge and the flowers began to emerge, and there was this wonderful palette of textures and shades of green and bright colors, and, you know, the wildflowers, and it was gorgeous. It also smelled really good.
You connected with the land. You connected with the land.
Yeah, you know, and it was like, okay, this is my home and I like it. You know, because I'm a transplant, and I was sort of an accident. I never woke up one day and said, gee, I hope someday I can live in the poorest state in the United States with the worst education and the most of this and that and the other thing that just absolutely moves slower than any other state in the Union. And it's named Mississippi. You know, I never, ever, ever dreamed of moving to Mississippi. Granted, I had relatives there. I'd had ancestors that lived and died here. But did I want to go to Mississippi? No.
But you're there. You're there because you're supposed to be, because there's a reason for everything. I don't believe in coincidence, and I don't believe in so-called accidents like that. I think everything happens on our path because it's absolutely supposed to. And obviously, you're there. I mean, who knows how many people have been touched through you, or how many people who have touched your spirit. So it's acceptance. I understand exactly what you mean. It takes a long time to really accept what life throws at us sometimes. It really does. And what I have learned through the years, once you accept something the way it is, it changes. So once you accept, okay, it's okay, you know, for me to be here, it's okay for this, it's okay for that, then it changes. I think that. Yeah,
I have a feeling that I'm not going to finish growing old here in Little Laurel, Mississippi.
No, you won't. You won't. As a psychic, I can tell you, you won't.
Yeah, well, you know, I had a pretty good idea. This is just another waypoint on the journey. Yeah. I had this goal as a child and young adult that I wanted my life to be boring and predictable, something that would make June Cleaver proud. You know, complete with picket fence. I was going to know what I was going to serve for dinner next, you know, on Tuesday 10 years from now. Do you think I have ever succeeded for so much as a week?
No, and I think if that ever happened to you, your spirit would be squelched. I really do. I think you would be so bored you couldn't deal with it. Let me ask you, do you have any connections with New York State or New York City?
Absolutely not. I'm such not a city person. Yeah, most of my life Laurel, which has about 18,000 people, up until I moved to Greater New Orleans, this was about twice as large as any place I'd ever lived.
Well, I feel New York around you. I'm not saying you're moving there, but I'm saying there's some kind of connection there. So that's going to happen. So just, be on the lookout for that, because there's something there for you, some kind of connection with New York. It may be New York State, not New York City, but there's definitely some kind of connection there for you. So you can write that one down and let me know when it happens.
I don't know. Right now, moving is as distant a thing as could be. Our primary vehicle has developed serious mechanical issues. As I said, this has been one of those weeks from hell when you're like, don't ever, ever, ever again say this is the worst. Don't even think it to yourself. This is the worst disaster ever, because it can and it will get worse. Don't tempt fate.
I think that's been happening to a lot of people in the last couple of years. I think a lot of things that we could call the worst, have really come upon a lot of us. I think it's a cleansing. And of course, when you're in the middle of it, it doesn't feel that way. But I do believe it has to do with this huge spiritual shift that we're going through. That a lot of things are coming to light so we can deal with them. And, deal with them on life's terms, not our own. I know I've been dealing with a lot, I would say probably the last 3 years. But I've learned so much about myself. And I've also learned to never say never. And I'm more accepting of people. I think I'm more accepting of myself than I've ever been, too. Now, how old is your daughter?
My daughter is 30.
Okay. I do feel like she's going to be okay, but she's not getting the proper treatment. I can tell you that. I don't know what she's doing or, who's treating her, but she's not getting the proper treatment for her kidneys.
Ah. I had asked her about that. We had actually, I just got that phone call just a little bit before the show, so we didn't have time to really go into what was going on completely. It was like, okay, call me after the radio program so we can, chill mom and daughter style and find out what's going on. Yeah. So, so we're keeping chin up.
Yeah, tell her that. And I do think that this that she's dealing with is based entirely on fear. There's something she fears that she really needs to deal with.
Well, she's a type 1 diabetic, so she has, and with a lot of complications, so she's had plenty of things to be afraid of here lately.
Yeah, it's her heart, yeah. But she's not getting the proper treatment is what I'm hearing, so maybe you can check into that for her. Or ask her. I just feel like she's not getting the proper treatment. Now, I have a client that I've been giving spiritual consultations, readings, or whatever to, probably off and on for, I would say a good 10, 15 years. And she never fails to say that's highly unlikely. I think she just does that just to irritate me. But then when what she's told, and I don't take credit, I'm the vessel. I mean, my ego has nothing to do with this gift or ability or responsibility. I was born with it. But when the things do come true that she's told, through her readings with me, she always has to eat crows, they say. So, and I'm not saying, that I'm 100% correct all the time. Nobody is. I mean, that's just impossible.
Well, there's so many variables.
Exactly.
Now, in terms of, I'm not a psychic, but I've had psychic events, and usually they're less than pleasant. There's some details of a person's nature that you would rather not know, especially when they randomly descend upon you.
I don't have that option. I'm sorry. I'm so sensitive. I've really had to learn how to deal with this. It's very, very strong.
Well, I'm kind of curious, how does a person learn to deal with it? Because there's some things about people that you meet or casual acquaintances you just really don't want to know. And to suddenly have this pop into your head is like, it's like somebody hacking up a loogie on you. Okay, to just put it bluntly. It's really gross.
It's been a struggle for me. It really has. And there was a time where I would pick up other people's fears and actually think they were mine. So what I have learned to do through the years is to sit down and use my rational sense with my intuition and ask for clarity, pray for clarity. But as far as, there's a lot of people I've had to push out of my life or just say I can't deal with it.
Well, I'll admit there have been some people that it's been slimy enough that I absolutely could not tolerate those people in my vicinity. And I've actually had to just, cut off whatever connection I had with them, had to cease and desist because I couldn't deal with the slime.
You know what the acid test of whether you've done the right thing or not is?
Huh.
Is if you miss them. I have never missed
them. No.
Leave me alone. I don't miss them. And there have been people who've asked me to leave them alone. So what goes around comes around. But no, I've never missed them. And I do believe this. I've learned this through the years too. That some people come into your life and they're only there for a short while. Sometimes it's unpleasant, sometimes it's pleasant, but they're there. You could call it karma or whatever, but they're there to either teach you a lesson or learn a lesson. And I think it's when we try to hold on to something when it's time to let it go is what causes all the pain and anguish. I know it has for me. Or hold on to somebody when it's time, or try to push them away before it's time for them to go. It's just a live and learn type thing. When you're human and if someone says when you're a spiritual being having a human experience, you're going to meet people you can't tolerate, and you're going to meet people who can't tolerate you. I used to think it was because, there was something in that person that was in myself I didn't like, but then I had this elder tell me one time, he said, no, sometimes you just don't like them. Well, you don't want to be around them.
Yeah, and sometimes the way I look at it, it might be nothing more than they needed a little leavening in their life, and I'm the yeast of the week. It had nothing to do with me personally. It was maybe they needed a glimpse into something else, and even if they judge me harshly or are really unpleasant to me, all my job was to provide the leavening and go on.
Right.
So, it does make those negative people a lot easier to tolerate. And I keep telling myself things too, like, go ahead and give them a smile, because probably nobody else has given one to them all day long.
I know, and I've had to really let go of a lot of inner anger that protected me as a child, growing up in a bad household. But as an adult, it's really hurt a lot of my relationships. So I've had to learn how to deal with a lot of inner anger. I'm still learning that. That's something, it's a daily thing for me. And I've also had to become almost a recluse to deal with this ability, because a lot of people want to be your buddy when they find out you're a psychic. But, can you tell me this? Can I just ask you one question? And that gets very tiresome. And so I've had to really set some parameters, around myself. But I think everybody has to do that, regardless of what your career is or what your chosen path is, that we all have to deal. We have to deal with, and sometimes it's family members that we don't get along with, and that really hurts.
Well, yeah, and as I've often had pointed out to me, we can choose our friends, but we don't get the choice of choosing our relatives.
Right.
And I've got some relatives I think the world of, and I have some that just put my teeth on edge. And there are times when gritting my teeth has resulted in cracked teeth, but and calluses on the tongue, as I put it, from biting my tongue all day long. But in the interest of world peace and tranquility, it was my best option. I used to stone a lot of bushes, to put it mildly. Bushes are quite resilient. In northern Arizona, there's a plant called, I think it's a four-wing salt bush. We just call them salt bushes. And they're very resilient to fire, flood, blowing sand, blowing gravel, et cetera, et cetera. And on a really bad day in Arizona where there was plenty of rocks, I could go stone a bush. Bush was none the worse for wear. I could curse at it. I could call it everything under the sun and some things that had never seen the sun. And at the end of the day, nobody's feelings were hurt. No damage had been done. And I felt better.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, I've had to learn alternative ways.
I scream into pillows or I hit pillows. That helps too. Or I just put on some music real loud and dance, around the living room. So just whatever it takes to get you through it. You have to. Life is. I remember an elder telling me one time she was very proud of me for writing and what I was doing, and I said, "But it's so hard." And she said, "Mary Jo, life is hard anyway. You might as well do what you love."
That's very, very true.
Life is hard.
One thing I've discovered, though, as I get older is it's much harder to actually make me angry. But when it actually does happen, sometimes it's a little bit harder to let go as easily. Like, you've fired up that boiler, and it took you months to do it, but I can't just release the pressure all at once. I have to just let it go a little bit at a time. But anger in general, you talk about being angry. As a young woman, I was a very angry woman. I was angry at the world. I was angry at society. I was angry at everything. Mm-hmm. And that anger, it took me a long time to work through it. But once I let it go, life was so much better.
Well, yeah, because anger just hurts us. And I think my anger came from confusion, like you were talking about earlier, just confusion of just not knowing, who to trust, who I am, what I'm supposed to be doing, or what, or setting myself up for disappointment. Oh, we could talk for hours about that, But one thing too that I have learned by becoming older is that stuff that used to bother me, I just don't care about anymore. If people want to sit around and do this or do that, that's their stuff, not mine. Yeah. Things that really used to irritate me don't seem to irritate me as much anymore. Now, if I'm tired or I feel bad, everything irritates me, But
yeah.
It's just that you just, and I think too, if you live long enough, you just realize that it's just not worth getting upset over. It's just really not. There are people out there that, their main objective in life is to upset others, and maybe that's what they're supposed to do. But I don't have to be around those people, or I don't have to deal with those people.
Yeah, or you can at least, even if you're so misfortunate as to have a burr under your saddle that's also a relative, you can limit the influence they have on your life. Even if you can't limit necessarily the amount of time you end up spending with them, you can limit the influence on your life. And you don't have to accept the things they do and say as part of your own load.
Right. And again, if there's someone who irritates me, I'm sure there's someone I irritate. So
I'm positive that the people that irritate me, I know I irritate the tar out of them.
Mm-hmm.
For the same reasons that, just a mirror reflection of, because we're not the way I put it sometimes is sometimes we're not the same species. We don't have anything in common other than we happen to share some ancestors, or there was a marriage someplace or something. Outside of that, we don't have, I love my brother and sister to death. Do I have anything in common? Not really. We don't even look alike.
Isn't that interesting the way that is? And I think that's in a lot of families.
Yeah, in fact, I found it really interesting. My sister and I were working together on some genealogy stuff, and she had done the DNA testing thing. And I thought, oh, that's cool, then I don't have to worry about it. And then she tells me, oh, yes, you do. You would have inherited a completely different set of DNA, even though we share the same parents. First of all, we don't look like the same. She's very tall, redheaded, very German-looking, and I'm not. I'm short and dark, and she's not. So, she said we probably inherited some very different genes, and we may still which is part of the reason for the DNA testing. And, we can be passing on the same things, but it's more obvious in your DNA, et cetera. I'm not a genealogist. Even when I was breeding dogs, I had a friend that specialized in that portion. I didn't, I was the hands-on person. She was the pedigree person. Yeah, that's just not my forte. But on our pedigree topic, I guess we're going to have to leave that for the time being. Folks, it is time for us to take a short break. So don't leave your computer, and we will be right back with more conversation from our guest, Mary Jo Moore.
To the fullest. Stay in gratitude, count your blessings, and prepare yourself for more opportunities around the corner. I'm Psychic Angela Thomas, and my website is angelathomas.org.
Tune in to The Mind Cemetery with your hosts, Chip and Nicole, every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern.
Exclusively on the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. We delve into UFOs, abductions, ghosts, aliens, conspiracies, and cryptozoology.
And how could you ever forget about those creepy topics you won't hear on your local news?
This is where I would insert my obligatory skeptical statement. The Mind Cemetery, where the paranoia about the paranormal comes to rest.
Follow us on Twitter and subscribe to us on Facebook. Also check us out on our website, mindcemetery.com, for show updates and the critically acclaimed Mind Cemetery blog.
It's not critically acclaimed, but you should check it out anyway, mindcemetery.com.
Join us for Contact in the Desert UFO Conference, August 9th through 11th. A weekend of exploration into ancient aliens, human origins, crop circles, UFO sightings, and new evidence of ongoing contact. A weekend of films, panels, lectures, and workshops will feature leading experts including George Noory and many more of some of the most important theorists and scientists in the field. Enter to win a free ticket at contactinthedesert.net. See you at Joshua Tree Retreat Center in August for Contact in the Desert, 760-365-8371.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Benetti, and along with Joe Montaldo, we host News on the Flip Side. Come join us every Saturday night at 7 p.m. Central for our 3-hour program. We have opinions on everything, and we're not afraid to share them. False history gets made all day, every day. The truth of the new is never on the news, but you can find it here with News on the Flip Side. Remember, don't be politically correct. Just be correct. Join us.
Tune in to UFO Undercover, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern. with your host, Joe Montaldo, right here on the Paranormal Radio Network.
Welcome back to the Dawn of Shades. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and tonight we are talking with Mary Jo Moore. Mary Jo, I know we haven't talked much about this in the first half, but you want to tell everybody where they can find your website and your books?
Yes, it's, let me spell it for you because my name is spelled a little differently. It's MaryJoMoore.com. That's MaryJoMoore.com. All my books are listed on the website. All the information about me, anything you need to know about, well, not anything, but a lot of things that you might be interested in would be found on my website. And I am on Facebook. I don't have a fan page. I'm going to get one though after tonight.
Well, I thought I'd give you a little nudge while I was thinking about it.
And this technology stuff, I'm just now really catching up on all that. But I am on Facebook, and you can email me through my website. So. Yeah,
too. I guess I thought about it more here recently, having released a novel myself as an independent author, and I also made the decision this summer, just last month, as a matter of fact. We used to keep book reviews for our guests and books I read on our website, and our website had a lot of issues in the last year and is being rebuilt now. And the discussion about whether or not to put the book reviews back there came up again, and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to put them back up there because I don't think it did the authors or readers very much good there compared to the number of people that could potentially see them elsewhere. So I've now changed it where all of the reviews go on two websites, with Amazon on the book, wherever you can buy the book, and then on Goodreads. And it was sort of, I was putting, placing my bets, so to speak, on which places would do the authors the most good. And that was the two, because I decided I couldn't deal with more than two. Because when you read as many books as I do and write as many book reviews as I do, it becomes somewhat of a chore, too, the reviews sometimes. So the deal was I needed to keep the work level down to a low roar so that I didn't postpone writing them. Because book reviews need to be written right after you read the book, not a month later or 6 months later when you can't hardly remember what you read. Yeah. So that was what I did.
Okay, that's a great idea, and I will work on a fan page on Facebook. I remember one of my granddaughters saying, "Nana, I Googled you." I thought, God, 5 years ago, I didn't know what in the heck Google was, and now it's like, oh, it's become just a common household word,
Well, we've turned it into a verb.
Right, like so many other words through the years. But the social media thing is just wonderful for authors, especially for people like myself who have small publishing companies, And let me segue myself into this. My latest book I just published is an anthology of Native writers, and it's available on my website. It's also available at Amazon.com, and it is called Unraveling the Spreading Cloth of Time, Indigenous Thoughts Concerning the Universe. And Trace A. DeMeyer, who's a wonderful Native writer who lives in Massachusetts, co-edited it with me. But the book is dedicated to Vine Deloria Jr., who was my mentor for years and years and who had passed his spirit several years ago. But he really, really opened a lot of doors for indigenous writers, and he encouraged me wonderfully through the years. And this book, I believe, is it's just a gem. I mean, there are 40 different Native writers, and there's so many wonderful topics in here. And basically, the reason I wanted to put this book together was to let people know that scientists are just now coming up with so-called proof of what indigenous peoples have believed and known for years and years and years. It's really, really ironic the way everything goes in circles. But I highly recommend this book to anyone who is interested in physics. We touch on different topics. Well, let me just share some of the chapter titles. Part 1: Our universe consists of the interconnectedness of all elements, thoughts, the seen and unseen, known and unknown in perpetual cyclical time. And I've got some wonderful writers, Native writers, some known and some who are just now becoming known. But I'm very, very pleased with the way this book turned out. I dreamed this book years ago. I actually started it in 2005 and was going to let another publisher publish it, and they wanted to change this and change that, so I just put the book aside. And then last fall, I thought it's time to get out that manuscript, and then I contacted some new writers and added some new essays and poetry and nonfiction, fan fiction to the manuscript, and it's just turned out wonderful. And I'm really grateful to all the Native writers who were involved in this, and especially to Trace DeMeyer, who was so wonderful to help me co-edit it, because editing is not easy. It's really not. It's really not, especially when you're dealing with so many different writers, and you know, you want their words to remain true, but you still have to edit it. So it was a hard task, but like I said, I'm really, really grateful with the outcome. And speaking of book reviews, we've gotten some wonderful book reviews, which are on my website.
Okay. It sounds like an absolutely wonderful book. And maybe I'll have to consider getting in touch with you and setting it up and bringing some of the authors that you featured on for a panel discussion one night.
That's a wonderful idea. And, you know, Keith Sakola, who I think referred you to me, was kind enough to let me use one of his songs, the lyrics to one of his wonderful songs in this anthology. So I've got Native writers from all over the United States and Canada, so I'm very grateful. But, you know, we haven't done anything like that, a panel of the writers. Oh, gosh, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I think as you were talking about the book, I was like, oh, that's what I should do next is set that up. I think that would be a really, really fun way for people to hear the writers and maybe a little bit about where they're coming from.
I would like to do that because most of these writers I dealt with through email. So, you know, I would like to hear their voices too. I would like to talk with them, you know, and hear them voice their opinions and share about their writings. That's a wonderful idea. Thank you.
Yeah.
I will gift you with a copy of the book. I will get you one in the mail this week so you'll know what you're dealing with here. How's that?
Oh, that sounds wonderful. And Keith has been a guest co-host with me. Last year we did a series called Native American Voices, and he co-hosted the entire series, except for the night he broke his foot. He wasn't there for that show. But anyhow, outside of that, he did guest co-host the shows with me. He's an absolutely wonderful person, a super host. And the audience absolutely loved him, too. And he's been on a couple of times since then as well. And he's a lot of fun to have on the program.
I met him years ago. As a matter of fact, he was in Cherokee performing at the casino there, and I interviewed him for News from Indian Country. And I have just been a big fan of his music and of Keith ever since then. I highly recommend Keith's music. I really do.
It's really funny that he lives in Arizona, where I spent the majority of my life, and I didn't meet him until I moved to Mississippi. Well, actually, I've never physically.
The way it works. Isn't that the way it works?
Yeah.
It's wonderful the way things are like that. It really keeps you guessing. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, it changes. You know, it's like learning a new language. Once you think you have it mastered, then something changes on it. So.
Well, I often have this expression about, that's what the wind blows my way. And a couple of years ago, I was setting up a series of shows, because I often will do these series, and I decided I was doing Music in America, and I was going to feature American musicians. And I don't know where I originally heard Keith Secola, but he cropped up at that point in time for whatever reason. I don't remember how. I found his website. I sent him off an email. And lo and behold, out of all the emails I'd sent, he was the first one that responded. And so he was the first one I set up in the series. I said, well, that's kind of apropos. I mean, the first guy in Music in America is a Native Americana musician. Sounds good to me, And, I have to admit, the show is really, really fun because I meet people that I otherwise probably wouldn't, if that makes any sense. I tend to be a recluse, so, I limit my interaction with the outside world. And so I meet very interesting individuals that come on the show, like doing the author series that we just wound up that I had originally scheduled you for until we had a conflict occur. And I read books that I never would have read otherwise. I, encountered, authors I wouldn't, because some of them were writing children's books or young adult or new adult books. Those are genres that I usually don't read books from. And I would have never, ever encountered them otherwise. So, the wind blows me some interesting things, Kind of like when I lived in there, when we got windstorms, you would get new dirt, new rocks, new tumbleweeds. All sorts of new things would arrive. Sometimes you lost things like pieces of your roof, siding off your house, bricks, yeah.
I think you're doing a wonderful thing. I really do. I admire you for what you're doing, and I think you're giving a lot of people an opportunity to share their truths or to share, giving them bragging rights, so to speak, and giving them an opportunity. And you're also giving your listeners wonderful opportunities to hear people they normally might not know about. So
right, because I do have a really eclectic mix. I do a wide variety of topics. Everything from how to get possessed by spirits to lasagna gardening to non-traditional houses to herbalism or crystals or writers or fiction or music. You never know. I have to admit, you never know what you're going to get because I bring people things.
That's how the world is. It takes all kinds, and you never know. One of your listeners might hear something that he or she never thought they would even believe in or attempt to believe in. It's you're spreading knowledge is what you're doing, which is good. It's a sharing, it's a broadening of one's horizons, and we do learn things in very odd ways. I think about it. You're talking about different elements and whatnot, and I was thinking about, it used to be that I didn't think of trees and plants as having any kind of awareness. And this may sound strange to people who never have lived around ponderosa pines, but I used to take my kids out into the forest, and when we'd be out there on the Mogollon Rim, we would sniff trees. Literally stick our nose in the bark and sniff. And ponderosa pines, the amusing thing is they usually smell like chocolate or vanilla.
And it was a fun thing to do. And then we'd smell the pinon, and that smells entirely different. And maybe we'd sniff a cedar tree or two or an oak tree. But one day we were at a particular crossroads where we often would stop, and we would get out and walk around. It was, usually that time to, just stretch our legs when we got there. And no matter what we were going to do, whether we were going camping or hiking or whatever, we tended to stop at this one particular crossroads. And they'd been logging in the area, not right where we usually would park and hang out, but 100 yards off to one side. And we got out, and sometimes I would pick up lumps of pine pitch that would fall on the ground, and I would take it home as a sort of a natural aromatherapy or scent in the house, because it smells really good. The pine pitch has got a real strong smell. Anyhow, we were walking around, and we sniffed the trees, and it was like, whoa, wait a minute, come here, smell this. So we all had to do it, and it was weird because the trees no longer smelled like chocolate or vanilla. They had this odd, fermented kind of aroma, sour, spoiled kind of smell. Not real pleasant, sort of like something that was, like I said, beginning to ferment. And the only explanation we had for why their scent had changed was because of the logging. Even though those trees had not had any damage, no falling trees, no trucks, no nothing, they had still been affected by the logging 100 yards away.
Of course. Everything has a spirit. Yeah, everything. By the way, I have a little line of quote books. They're pocket-sized books that I've written, and one is 3 quotes. But yeah, everything is connected, and everything is affected. And you're absolutely right. Those trees, something. Well, it's just like we need to realize too that when something happens to our species, it affects us, whether we realize it or not. And that you were talking about DNA earlier. That's one thing that I've really been working with and thinking about, and maybe even going to write a book about, is how we inherit through our DNA. Not only do we inherit diseases and traits and talents, but we also inherit energies, what happened to our ancestors, or maybe something that our ancestors did that they shouldn't have done, or whatever. But we have all of that in us, and you never know when it's going to wake up or how it's going to manifest itself. Genetic memory, I guess, it would be a good technical term for
Well, I know that my personal observation is that to a degree, we all inherit a personality blueprint. Now, granted, our parents can influence it by our upbringing, and our life experiences are going to influence it, but you get that basic blueprint along with your DNA. And I reached this conclusion because I have a very large extended family, and often people grow up and haven't met everybody within that extended family. And then when you get together, it's like, wow, they walk and they act so much like so-and-so, and they even kind of look like them. But, why? I mean, they're like only second or third cousins. I mean, in my family, being related means you can describe how you're related in less than 15 minutes. It takes a while sometimes.
Right,
right. And to this day, when I'm at a family get-together, I'll tell people I'm Snooky's granddaughter and so forth and so on, go right through my mother, so that they know who I am. They put me on that family tree on the right limbs and whatnot, because it helps everybody understand, okay, why you know so-and-so or don't know so-and-so. And it's because of how that family tree is arranged. And it tells everybody right away that, which branch I belong to. Mm-hmm. But anyhow, the whole thing with that personality, I saw my daughter, who grew up with very limited contact with my sister, exhibit many of the same personality traits. And other distant cousins exhibit many of the same personality traits. And what's even more peculiar is I've noticed that certain, you might say like coloration, the hair and eye color, which seem to always go together, means that a certain set of personality traits have likely also been inherited. Because they seem tagged with them somehow. I don't understand how yet, but, and am I right? I don't know. That's based on observation, not anything any scientist is going to take as, set in stone. I mean, for one thing, they can't measure personality traits real well. Psychology is still a very soft science. And, you look at, in my case, I probably have met and gotten to know at least slightly, probably 300 people in my extended family. And I've noticed certain traits consistently seem to go together. Their parents may be able to downplay them to a degree, but they're there. Yeah, and
scientists are saying now that they can actually change DNA. And that's something that I've thought about probably over the last 6 months to a year, is that maybe when we go through a major healing in our lives, that we are changing DNA.
Well, I actually interviewed somebody, or was going to interview somebody, because sometimes things happen, that did talk about us changing our own DNA. And I had a really hard time understanding this concept, even with the book. Because, like I said, some things just sink in my head a little bit slower than other things. Other things I grasp very quickly. But this particular one I was having a hard time with. And then lately, through social media, I haven't read the articles, but I've seen a number of postings referring to an article about how the GMOs, which is a huge issue in regards to food labeling, organic foods, natural foods, etc., how they're actually also changing our DNA. And that could potentially be a huge thing, especially since some of them are apparently claiming that third generation is inflicted with sterility or infertility. And, even in my own family, in the last few generations, we've seen a huge upswing in the number of the girls within my family who cannot have children easily or at all, compared to what it was 2 generations ago when, there's a saying went, all her husband had to do was hang his pants on the bedpost and she was pregnant again. And, that doesn't happen anymore in my family. I mean, we don't have people who have packs of kids, I can remember, when I was a kid, we'd get together, there was a huge swarm of kids. Then when my kids were little and we'd get together, there was a few kids. And now we get together and there's hardly any kids. And so there's a shift, in the number of children. Is it because culturally we don't have as many children as we did 2 generations ago? Possibly that's part of it. But it's often not by choice that families are not having children, at least in my own family.
Right. It could be a cleansing process of something that really needs to be cleaned out of the DNA. I mean, there's all possible explanations.
I've even been told, well, a woman's not going to have a child unless, some spirit, soul, whatever name you want to tag it, decides they want her for their mother. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, why would anybody choose to be born in a place where starvation and child mortality is incredibly high? I mean, that, I don't know about that one, I'm still sort of out on that one. I haven't really made up my mind whether that's something I'm going to say, well, that could be true or not. Because I really do have a hard time believing that anyone would choose to be born in a country with famine or war or any of those really horrific things that we see happen.
Yeah, and I do believe that that maybe we're just not advanced enough spiritually or even emotionally to be able to handle those answers, or maybe even to find those answers. Because there's so many different parts of it, and some might say, well, it's karma, or it's this, it's that, or payback, or whatever. I don't know. That the next anthology that I'm really thinking about doing with Native writers has to do with reincarnation, which and some tribes believe in it and some don't, and some individuals do and some don't. So I think that will, require a lot of research, and it will also be something, to my knowledge, that has not been covered thoroughly in Native literature. So I think that's going to be another groundbreaking anthology, just like the one I just mentioned. And I think it's time that we start sharing our beliefs, and even if we question our own beliefs, which I think I think that's a good thing at times. But there's just so much. I don't think that there's one generalized answer. I really don't.
Well, no, and I guess there's that old saying, "All roads lead to Rome." I think the same thing is pretty much true of religion. Exactly. It doesn't matter which road you hop on; they're all going to the same place eventually. Which, in our case, would be death, and whether or not our spirit continues, or if it sort of goes into this spiritual soup, and when a spoonful is extracted, it's multiple people, or what was once multiple people. That could possibly be true, too. I guess in my own case, I believe that we do have, afterlife. I'm pretty sure nobody's sitting around singing hymns and playing harps, because that would be really, really boring. But at the same time, I have to believe in reincarnation, whether, it's in the form of, our genetic memory. Is that where these recollections of prior lives comes from? Possibly. But, I guess in my opinion, it looks like the evidence is all indicating that reincarnation in one form or another is most likely true, I guess is where I'm at.
It's the only thing that makes sense to me. And, I've thought about it a lot, I've read a lot. And, we are our own ancestors, any way you look at it. But reincarnation is really the only thing that makes sense to me. Nothing else. I just don't think that the spirit ever dies. I don't think it had a beginning, and I don't think it had an ending. I think it's just something that's always existed, and that's why I'm really thinking seriously about working on this anthology and asking writers who are interested to write about, their beliefs of reincarnation and see what they can share. I want people who don't believe in reincarnation to write about why. I'm open to people.
Both sides of the coin. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think that's only fair. But there's just, in this anthology that I just mentioned, Unraveling the Spreading Cloth of Time, and this is just a short intro to part 3. And the title of the chapter is Prayers, Dreams, Visions, Songs, Dances, Birth, and Death, Beckoning the Nucleus of the Great Mystery. In indigenous beliefs, one does not just speak the prayer, dream the dream, visualize the vision, sing the song, or dance the dance, but concretely experiences a personal power with these. We have long known that prayers bring healing and guidance in all forms. Dreams and visions bring clarity and revelations. songs bring connection with all energies, and dances bring rain and cleansing, just as scientists have determined that music makes plants grow, etc. The great mystery represents all that is familiar and alien about the universe, where energy begins and circles back to again and again. While in human form, one can, by the various mentioned methods, touch inside this unfathomable sacred center. We recognize there is, always has been, and always will be a sacred center from which we evolve in return, travel back to again and again. Birth is a recoming, death a returning, constituent parts of the awe-inspiring cycle we experience as continuation of existence. Another reason that I believe in reincarnation is that we don't live long enough to experience or find out everything I think we need to know.
Yeah, well, I've often said, about the time we start to get our act together, our bodies fall apart.
Exactly. But people are living longer now than unless you go back to biblical times when people lived to be 900 years. Oh, and I don't know if that time was experienced as our time is today. But people are living longer now,
I know in my own family we had a number of people living to be 90 and 100, even 100 years ago or longer. I mean, long lives were something that, we actually haven't seen any change in my own family tree as far as how long. In fact, we may not be living as long as we did before.
So that's every family. That's good genes you've got there, long.
Yeah. And, I know that my ancestors had a much harder life than we do today.
Oh, God, yeah.
Even descriptions from, because I was fortunate enough to grow up with people that had been born in the 1800s, talking about their childhoods and whatnot. They were an active part of my life. And the lives that they led were much more burdensome than the ones we have today. I mean, we don't even have arranged marriages anymore. Hallelujah. And, we get to choose our own partners. And that's something like my parents, on my dad's side, he was the first generation that didn't get stuck with an arranged marriage. So that was something that was going on in the 1900s still. That and it may still be going on in many families to a degree. It may not be as blatantly arranged. There may be more subtle coercion, shall we put it? But it still exists, even in the United States. But when you were talking about the whole spirit thing, I'm going to tell you a little story. After my son died, I was grieving really intensely, and I had a dream one night. And it was a profound dream that entirely changed how I was managing my grief. And in the dream, I was at a huge family gathering, and it was all my family. And some of them were so far back in my family tree that their faces had kind of blurred into an oval of nothingness because, I didn't know what they looked like even. And those were the really ancient ancestors, the ones closer to me I recognized. And I was on the porch and I was fixing a plate of food for my son. And as I handed him the food, I thought, oh, my God, he's starting to rot. And my grandmother was there, and she was also deceased. And in the dream, she looked like she did when she's about the age I am now, not the age she was when she died. And, she looked at me and she said, you've got to stop doing that and let him go or he's going to continue to rot. And then I woke up, and it was like, whoa, talk about your grandmother coming to, give you a warning. That was a profound one, that you're just not dealing with this appropriately. And I needed to let him go, literally. And so it did change how I was managing my grief, for the better, obviously, because I'm now a functional person, not a basket case. Did it make it easier? No, but it made it a sense of more acceptance.
Well, I think that's why a lot of races, not just tribal people, but had grieving periods, and then that was it. You grieve for a certain amount of time, and then that's it. And I was told a long time ago that if you keep grieving and grieving, you hold that spirit back, and that spirit can't go on to where he or she's supposed to go. So I think what you had was a spirit visitation, because not only am I a psychic, I'm a medium. I mean, I can literally talk to dead people. I know that sounds so horrible, but it's true. And that's come through in a lot of readings that I've done for people who have lost loved ones. If you keep grieving, that spirit will stay attached to you, worried about you, instead of going. And there's nothing wrong with grieving. We have to grieve. It's part of the losing process. I mean, we have to grieve, but if we stay in that grief, we're not allowing that spirit to go on and do what he or she has to do.
Right. And in my case, my grandmother, she was probably the person that represented authority in the deepest and most profound way in my life.
And she was with him.
Yeah.
She was with him on the other side. She was there to greet him, yeah. And she probably had some things she wanted to do with him, or she wanted to work with him. I have a book I've written called A Book of Spiritual Wisdom for All Days, and it's kind of like a weekly reader, and it's things I have learned through doing 20, 25 years of psychic and medium readings. And one thing that I have learned, and that keeps coming up again and again, is that once we pass the spirit, doesn't mean everything's okay. We don't have our bodies, but we still have to keep growing spiritually. I don't mean that everything's not okay, but we still have to keep growing spiritually. We still have to work on ourselves and finish what we didn't get to finish here.
Right.
So invariably, there's always someone on the other side, in the other realm, waiting to greet whoever passes, to help them through the transition. And then we're called to do something on the other side. And again, and then, if we decide we want to come back, fine. But we never stop learning. We never stop growing.
Right.
And I think that's why that saying is we're spiritual beings having a human experience.
Uh-huh.
And then we go and we're spirits having a spiritual experience, and then maybe we decide to come back. But I think what you had is you had a spiritual visitation. Dreams are powerful. And I think that was a wonderful blessing for you and for your son. That's wonderful.
Well, it did have a profound, effect on me. Because, like I said, I'd gone through the motions. I had gone back to work, and I was going through the motions of living, and all those things. But was I engaged? No, I was, I was on autopilot, you might say. And for me, the grieving process was difficult. It's not something that even, 13 years later, am I over it? No. It's still part of who I am. That grief, that sense of loss. But is it manageable? Yeah. You the way I put it, you got this big hole, but it's got calluses now. You can touch it and it's not raw. And is that ever going to go away? Probably not.
No.
But the whole thing is that now it's got the calluses. It's not a raw weeping wound. It's it's healed the best it can. And that's just the way it is. And for everybody that loses somebody, they get these holes, you might say. Some of us look like Swiss cheese sometimes. But, you know, and they're different sizes depending on how much of your life was wrapped around that person. But it does affect us. It affects how we react. In my case, you know, I can remember getting through some of the rough spots, and I would think, oh, boy, you know, if I can't get through this in the afterlife, I'd have to explain why I wasn't as wonderful as they thought I was. You know, and that was a motivator because, you know, in his eyes, I could fix everything. I could do anything. I knew everything. You know, was that true? No. But he saw me as a survivor. And, you know, I needed to hold on to that, if that makes any sense. That was my lifeline.
Yes. And something you said, too, about being on autopilot, that serves its purpose, but we cannot live on autopilot. So I think that your dream, your spiritual visitation came to help you as much as your son's spirit, because we can't just live on autopilot. You know, we can't do that. And if we try and we do that, we eventually cut ourselves off from those who are still with us. And we can't do that. We can only grieve and we can only be on autopilot for as long as it takes, but we can't continuously do that. I lost my first son, 43 years ago, and he was only 8 months old, and I still grieve it. You know, I still think about it. Like you said, does that hole ever close up? No. But it's just, I think when you lose someone who's close to you, that it's you never totally, as they say, get over it. But that's something that we all have in common, and I think that that's one of our greatest fears is losing those we love. It's and it's just like you said at the beginning of the show. Tell someone you love them or hug them. That is so profound. It's so simple but so profound, because we just really, you know, we need to do that every day. We really do. We need to do that every day. We need to make a point to email, call, or just tell someone we love them every day. And not necessarily the same person every day, but we need to do that. That's a healing energy that helps everywhere and helps the world.
So's laughter.
Yes. Oh, gosh, yeah. If we didn't have our sense of humor, we would have never, ever made it. I know my ancestors wouldn't have. You've got to have a sense of humor. You can't take everything literally, and you can't be serious about everything. I mean, you know, I used to think about these gurus or these people who lived in caves and meditated and did all this, and I thought, where's the fun in that? You know, because if you can't laugh,
sort of like envisioning this concept of an afterlife as a place where we all sit around in clouds with wings on, playing the harp and singing hymns.
No. Well,
I mean,
I can tell you for a fact that spirits have senses of humor because it comes through in the readings I do. You know, and it's a sense of humor is it's not a coping mechanism. It's a way to live. You know, it's like crying. You have to have both. You have to balance it out. But if you don't have a sense of humor, you know, that's sad. That's very sad. That's something to cry about if you don't have a sense of humor.
Yeah. I guess a long time ago, I knew two old ladies in the same little town that I lived in. One was so sour you'd swear she spent her entire life sucking on a lemon. All right, nobody wanted to be around her, and she spent all her time complaining about how her grandkids never came to visit. And the rest of us are standing there listening, and we're thinking, we know why she doesn't want to come to visit. The same reason you shoot at the neighbor kids with a BB gun, you know. She was just really, really unpleasant. Then there was this other little old lady, and she wore bright red lipstick. white enough that she could see it when she looked in the mirror, which tells you it was a little whiter than it should have been. All right, it sort of resembled a clown, and everybody called her Woody. And she was a little bitty old lady. She drove and probably shouldn't have been, but everybody in the small town sort of made allowances for her because she might stop in front of the doctor's office and get out and park, just put her car in park and go in, even though it was in the middle of the road, instead of pulling in the parking lot, because, that's just what she did. And, I was working in a restaurant. I was a very young woman at the time. And she would come in every day, 3, 4 o'clock for supper. And she would eat. And she always told you some sort of a corny little joke. And she always had a smile on. She always said something nice to you. Okay, I don't remember if she gave me a tip or not because it didn't matter. I have no idea whether she tipped me or not. And like I said, it didn't matter. But I looked at her and I thought, you know what? That's what I want to be like when I'm old. Mm-hmm. A little bit eccentric and a whole lot happy. Instead of that sour woman who's shooting at the neighbor kids with her BB gun, and if their ball lands in her yard, it comes in her collection inside of her house, and looking like she's sucked on a lemon her entire life. Who wants to be old like that?
Really?
Where nobody wants.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody wanted to be around her, and the more she complained about it. And then, years later, I would see the same thing in a retirement community. All these nasty, unpleasant people, and they spend all their time complaining how their family never called or came to visit. And I'm thinking, I know why. Nobody wants to be around you, not even the ones you're paying to be around you. They don't want to be here. They don't want to be around you because you're so negative and unpleasant. You have a choice. You can choose to be bitter and sour, or you can choose to be sweet and happy.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I've opted for the sweet and happy.
Being bitter like that is the epitome of selfishness too. It really is, being that judgmental and that hateful. That's just selfishness.
I concluded, way before I was even close to being eligible to live in one of these retirement communities because they have their age barriers. I concluded I never wanted to live in one because if all I surrounded myself with was other old farts who hated kids, kids are, sometimes they can be annoying, sometimes they can be worrisome. And that's just when they're not even related to you, but other kids are an absolute delight. And of course, I've got a granddaughter. I think the sun rises and sets on that little head. Do I let her get by with things? Oh yeah. There are times when I will say, no, thou shalt not cross this line, not with grandma anymore. But, at the same time, it's not because, it's because I'm afraid she's going to hurt herself, and she just can't. And, she is. She's the light of my life. She's going on 3 now already.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I can remember when she first was born, she was a little slip of a thing. But we are getting closer to the end of our program. So
it's been wonderful. It really has.
Yeah, everybody says 2 hours, it's a long time. It flies by.
It has. And we've covered a lot of topics, too. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your wonderful show. I have really, really enjoyed it.
Well, I'm glad you have. But before we get too close to the end, you want to give everybody your website and at least some of the titles of the books?
Yes, sure. Again, it's MaryJoMoore.com. That's MaryJoMoore.com, and that's COM, not CAL. I know one person kept spelling it the wrong way, but and oh my gosh, I have 2 novels, The Diamond Doorknob and the sequel, When the Dead Dream, and I have 2 books of short stories. The Boy with the Tree Growing from His Ear and Other Stories, and then Red Woman with Backward Eyes, and then the new anthology that I mentioned earlier, and the quote books, Tree Quotes, Crow Quotes, and Desert Quotes. 2 books of poetry, Confessions of a Mad Woman and Spirit Voices of Bones. So as you can tell, I'm a pretty prolific writer, but I've been writing now, well, seriously, ever since 1995. So I stay pretty busy with my writing. And please visit my website. If nothing, just send me an email. I'd love to hear from people. I'd like to get some feedback, like you said, on what we've discussed tonight. I think we've covered some very interesting topics and some very controversial topics, too. So we should get some kind of feedback.
Yes, so people, check out Mary Jo's website and send her an email. Send me an email. Go on to Facebook, search for Gia Scott's Dawn-of-Shades, and join the group, and you can talk to us there, too. With that, though, we are out of time. Once again, I hope that tonight's program has brought everyone plenty of food for thought, as well as more illumination for your own personal journey towards truth. Tune in again next week as we embark on a whole new topic as we explore the world of movie making with Lone Dog Productions. The following week, we're going back to the books again with a well-known and much beloved Piers Anthony, with a rare live interview with the renowned fantasy author. I know I have worn out more than one of his books in paperback format. So, with all of that to tease and tantalize, I bid you all farewell. You've been listening to the Dawn of Shades, and I'm your host, Gia Scott, and good night.
Comments and views expressed on the